Hey everyone! So in the last video I was talking about the importance of understanding content versus remembering content. In this video we are going to be going a bit deeper into the topic of understanding. Specifically, I'm going to be answering two questions. That is, how do you know if you understand something, and how can you deepen your understanding of something? So yeah, let's go. So if you have something that you want to understand, like a concept or a theory or like an equation or whatever, you want to be able to gauge your process. And so you really want to be able to have a way to test your understanding of something. So the framework that I used whilst I was in school to test my understanding of something is that I asked myself the question, could I explain this concept to a friend? And if I felt confident enough in myself that I could explain a concept to my friend, that would mean that basically I understood it. And yeah, so that's essentially how I gauged my understanding of a concept. Like if I was studying a formula or whatever, I would think like, okay, do you think I could explain the derivation of this formula and what it means to like my friend here who also studies physics but hasn't been able to understand that formula yet? Could I explain it to them simply enough that they could get it? And if I felt like, yeah, I could probably do that, then for me that would mean that, yep, tick the box, I understand this. And this idea comes from the famous physicist Richard Feynman. He said that if you can't understand something simply, then you don't understand it. And so the Feynman technique is the thing where you try to test your understanding of something by asking yourself, oh, can you explain this to a 5-year-old? It doesn't literally mean explain it to a 5-year-old, but it means like, could you explain this with simple words to a layman and try and get them to understand the concept? Feynman was famous in physics because he was drastically good at being able to take complex subjects and explain them in a way that anyone could understand. Feynman's understanding was so deep that he could bring physics down from this high level down to the common level and talk with us folks. And so that's what essentially we are trying to get at. We want to get at a level of understanding that's so deep within a subject that we are able to bring it down to the layperson. Because essentially what you want to try and do whilst you're studying in IB is that rather than try and memorize a bunch of stuff, you really want to try and weave together this story narrative in your head, which connects various bits of facts and information together into a network of ideas which you can use to solve problems. And so whether you are able to communicate a concept to someone, that is a really good indication of how clear and how concise the concept is in your head. In maths and science or whatever, what I would do is I would just like get a piece of paper and see if I could try and explain it to the paper, basically. Like I was trying to explain to my notebook this concept. I didn't do the notes whilst looking at like a book or whatever. I was just making them like by myself after I had tried to understand it. If I found a hole in my knowledge where I was like, wait, what's this part? Then I would go back to the book, check it out, and be like, ah, it's this thing, and then I would add that in. And yeah, so that's how I test my understanding of a subject. And yeah, so if I was studying atomic structure or whatever, do I think I can explain atomic structure to my friend? I could very easily tutor atomic structure to someone, and that means that I actually understand it. Okay, so now let's talk about the second question, which really goes hand in hand with the first question, which is how can you better develop your understanding of subject matter? And so based on my experience, the specific tactics are going to vary subject to subject, but I really do think it all boils down to the same thing. And so how I see it is that if you want to understand something, it really comes down to doing two things. The first one being trying to read and learn about that subject from multiple different perspectives. And secondly, you want to engage in active recall around that material. Each are really important and they connect with each other a lot. And so starting off with the first one, I think a really good test of your understanding is whether you can recognize an idea from multiple different perspectives. In order to develop that ability to see things like around in a circle rather than just straight, you want to layer your study with multiple different types of activities. Then the deeper your understanding is going to be. So again, whether that be through reading it from different textbooks, watching YouTube videos about a topic, talking to your teacher about a topic, talking to your friend about a topic, the more layers that you can add to your studying around a particular topic, and the more times you look at a concept from multiple different perspectives, the more deeper your understanding is going to be, because each time you're reading it from a different perspective, you're getting new insights and information about that topic that the other sources didn't have. Lots of people just go to class and they watch their school lecture and they expect that they're going to get the concept just like that, when that's really not a good expectation to set for yourself. I also know a lot of people who really research into what is the best textbook for this subject. They like search vicariously to find like the perfect notes for a subject, as if they're searching for one single source of truth which they can refer to. But in reality, in my opinion at least, there's rarely ever going to be like one perfect source, and it's best to really just go broad with what resources that you refer to, because it really doesn't matter like what YouTube video you watch, what tutor you have, what textbook you read. What really matters is whether you are going to be able to understand this topic, and that level of understanding can come from multiple different places. It can come from the Oxford textbook, it can come from the Pearson's textbook, it can come from your teacher talking on the board, it can come from you just sitting and thinking about it for a bit. It doesn't really matter where your understanding comes from, and if you just limit yourself to only using one source, then that can really limit you. Because here's the thing with each of the sources that you use. Each source is its own perspective of looking at one thing. And each of those perspectives are going to be personally flawed to you in some way. Whether that be the poor use of language that you can't understand that well, or the fact that they missed out on something really important. Maybe it was in too much detail, maybe it was in too little detail, maybe it was too boring for you to understand. Every perspective on a thing is going to have a flaw in some way that's going to detach you from your ability to learn it. That's why looking at a concept from multiple different perspectives solves this issue. Watching a YouTube video about it, then asking your teacher about it, then talking to your friend about it, then looking at diagrams about it, then looking at an infographic about it is really helpful because it allows you to see the thing from multiple different perspectives, and each of those sources are going to fill in gaps which the other sources left out. You don't have to suffer from the fact that the Oxford textbook missed out on this little key piece of information because you got it from somewhere else. And there's multiple ways to do this. I'm just encouraging you to not stick to one source and have different options. Like for example, for chemistry, I had the book that I referred to. There are 3 chemistry YouTubers online, Richard Thornley, MSJ Chem, and Andrew Wang, all 3 of them which I used. And I also talked to my teacher a lot. And when I still couldn't get it, I would just research it on YouTube and find some other random person who was willing to explain the topic to me. Like when I was studying math, what I would do is I would first start to read the textbook and try and get it from the textbook. If I couldn't get it from the textbook, then I would try YouTube. I would look at either Eddie Wu videos or Khan Academy videos on the topic. Then I would check if 3 Boom 1 Bound has some interesting videos on it. And if I didn't get it from there, I would ask my friend if she got it. And if I didn't get it from them because it was like super IB specific and they didn't have a video on it, I would ask my friend about it. Then I would ask my teacher to explain it. Then I would like look at the textbook again and try to do those problems. And then eventually along that line, from looking at multiple different perspectives, I would go from not being able to understand the topic to being able to understand the topic because I have multiple different ideas and insights from all of these sources that I looked at, which I can use to formulate my own understanding of a topic. Like the same thing works in history. Like you cannot expect to understand one historical narrative just by reading the textbook. That's never enough. You gotta read the textbook, you gotta go on Wikipedia, look it up, you gotta read like 3 other different textbook examples, you gotta talk to your teacher about it, you gotta watch some random TED talk about it before it all starts to like formulate and click. Like you really don't want to limit yourself to just reading one source. Learning is really just about collecting a bunch of ideas and then trying to figure out how everything's interlinked so that you can create a network of ideas in your brain, which then becomes knowledge. And to do that, you want to engage in multiple different variations of material around a subject and collect as many ideas and little mini insights as you can, which then through seeing them explained in many different ways strengthens the connections between those ideas and makes you a smarter person. And so yeah, that brings me on to my second point, and that is the importance of active recall whilst you're engaging in this material. Active recall sounds really confusing at first, but all it really is engaging your brain to test yourself. I'm gonna leave some resources down below on Ali Abdaal's video. He has an amazing video on active recall, and so I'm gonna be spouting off a bit about what he said, but essentially your brain is like a muscle where the more you use it, the stronger it becomes. And there's also the saying where neurons that fire together wire together. And so whilst you're engaging in the material, you don't want to just be passively reading it or passively watching the YouTube video or passively watching the lecture in class. You really want to be constantly engaging in that material so that you can really absorb the knowledge. Because engaging in active recall and like trying to engage your brain in the content forces your brain to like pick apart all of the different pieces and try and put them together in some sort of network of ideas that make sense. So what does active recall look like in practice? Well, active recall is simply just testing yourself, and this can appear in many different variations. Whether that be whilst you're reading your textbook, you're trying to get some engagement, so you're like reading a bit, stopping, trying to explain it to yourself, reading a bit, doing the practice questions, reading a bit, trying to explain it to a friend. It's all about just asking yourself questions about the material, trying to answer them in your own head, and then referring to the source after you've answered them, not just trying to passively absorb the content. When you watch a YouTube video, when they draw a diagram, pause the video, get your sketchbook out, and then like try and copy down the diagram without looking at the video, and then see if the diagram is similar to yours and fill in all of the gaps that you didn't get right. If in the video they go through a problem, try and pause the video, do the problem first by yourself, then look at the video and the answer and see how it's similar to yours and try and pick up insights from there. Essentially what you want to do is whilst you're going through all of these resources, you want to try and force your brain to take it in And the way you're going to do that is through engaging in active recall and testing yourself. Another thing that I did whilst I was trying to understand a concept is that I would continually ask myself, could I explain this to a friend? Like what I said before, if you are confident in explaining something to someone, that means you understand it. Whilst you're engaging in material, keep asking yourself, okay, could I explain it to a friend? Because that's going to lead you to what your weaknesses are. And whilst you're asking yourself this question, it's going to be able to help you point out what your weaknesses is. So if you feel like you're not that confident in your ability to explain it to someone, ask yourself why. Oh, maybe it's because you don't fully understand this. And then you go and research this part until you fill in that gap of knowledge. And then you ask yourself the question again, could I explain this to a friend? No. Oh, because of this still. And then you go research that part, and you continuously try and fill in this gap through asking yourself the question, oh, could I explain this to someone? Until eventually there are no questions left and you could feel confident in explaining it to someone. Therefore, that means you understand the topic. And the best thing that you can actually do is grab a friend and try and explain the topic to them and try and make them understand it. And then get them to ask you questions about it, or maybe they just naturally have questions about it. And then if you can answer it, good. That's strengthening the neurons in your brain because you're engaging in active recall whilst you're trying to explain it to them. But then if you don't understand it, that's also good because that points to a gap in your knowledge, which you can then go fill, figure out what the answer is, then come back to your friend and re-explain it and see if they get it again. That way you're helping both you and your friend out. And yeah, it's just a fun thing to do. Trying to get your brain to understand something is the repetitive process of asking your brain questions, not being afraid to ask questions, and then engaging in content around the subject matter, which hopefully answer those questions and helps you develop your understanding to the point where you feel like you are confident enough to be able to explain it to a friend, or at least the examiner if you don't have any friends. It's about constantly trying to figure out what those gaps are through those questions that you keep asking, and then just constantly filling those gaps. Everyone gets upset that they can't understand something immediately once they've read it once, but that's just a ridiculous expectation to put on yourself, because maybe that source just wasn't for you. Maybe your teacher just didn't teach in the way that you understand. Maybe that lecture was just not engaging enough for you to pay attention. You don't need to limit yourself to one river of information. If you really want to step it up, you really want to be courageous enough to go out there, search for resources that can help you, read about things from multiple different perspectives, continuously start to ask questions about things, and eventually, after you do that enough, after you fill in enough gaps, then you'll find yourself starting to understand something. It's not going to make sense at the start. It never does. But that's your task as a learner, as a student, to try and put the puzzle pieces together so that you can eventually come to the point where you understand something. And yeah, that's all I have to say for this video. If you want to ask more questions about it, you can DM me on Instagram, or you can leave a comment below on your thoughts and opinions. This is obviously just my opinion. I'm not an expert in education or whatever. I'm just a student, and this is just what I've seen based on my experiences. And so yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.